They came to harvest a world that had been sharpening itself in the dark for 300,000 years. They had no idea. The report was submitted at 300 hours by station reckoning. Lens 7 had filed 31 reports exactly like it across his 2 centuries of observation work. He submitted this one the same way he submitted every other, efficiently, without ceremony. The way you dispose of food that has turned without pausing to mourn it. No theater, just the act itself. Verdania, third planet of the Solon system. Single inhabited body. Population approximately 8.1 billion. Technology Index Class 1. Intraspecies conflict ongoing. Unified planetary defense capability negligible. Threat rating non-applicable. Recommendation, harvest candidate. Forward to Voron Expansion Division for processing. He sent it. Prepared himself a warm beverage. The drink came from a world the Voron had processed 7 years prior. Sweet across the front of the palate. A quiet bitterness at the finish. He had an entire case of it because no one was producing it anymore. He did not dwell on that. He never dwelled on things like that. The Voron fleet arrived on a Tuesday. 14,000 ships. The smallest measured 300 meters end to end. The largest, the command vessel, the Odovar, 7th ship of the line. The ship Lens 7 had ridden into 23 first contact situations and watched 23 civilizations fold like paper left in the rain. That one stretched 11 kilometers from prow to engine burn, larger than some mountain ranges, quieter in the vacuum than a person holding their breath in a dark room. They emerged from fold space at 6:12 hours Greenwich Mean Time, 40,000 kilometers above the equator, and they hung there above the blue planet like a second moon, assembled entirely from blades. Commander Thessaly Narov stood at the observation port and looked down. She had seen planets like this before. Blue, green, thin cloud cover, wide oceans. The sort of planet that softened the species living on it. Too much food, too much water, too much ease. Species from worlds like this had a tendency to weep during surrender proceedings. One of them had lost consciousness entirely. Narov had the recording archived somewhere. She adjusted her collar. Routine. She reminded herself, this is routine. Her aide pressed the broadcast file into her hand. Standard format. The same language more or less that she had opened 23 other capitulation negotiations with. Change the species identifier. Calibrate the frequency for whatever auditory organs the target species employed. Run it in a continuous loop until they responded. Simple. Narov authorized it with a single word. The signal entered Verdania's atmosphere at 6:13 hours and 14 seconds. By 6:13 hours and 58 seconds it had been received, decoded, and translated by 7 independent agencies spread across 4 continents. The translation required 44 seconds because the Voron, either from long habit or quiet arrogance, had embedded a cipher key directly inside the header of the broadcast. They had performed this exchange so many times that the possibility of a species unable to crack it simply had not entered their calculations. By 6:14 hours, it was in the possession of the United Verdania Defense Command. The UVDC had been convening an emergency session since 6:03 hours. The moment fold space activity was first detected. 11 minutes of preparation before the broadcast arrived. 11 minutes of people moving at double pace down corridors and dropping into chairs and pulling up displays and finding it difficult to meet each other's eyes. The command chamber sat 700 meters below ground. It had been built that way deliberately. 700 meters of solid granite between the people inside it, and whatever might descend from the sky one day. Commander Thessaly Narov read the translation once. Then she placed it on the table. She pressed her left thumb in slow circles against the pad of her index finger. 3 seconds. A small private ritual that no one in that room would have recognized as the behavior of a woman who had already arrived at a decision she knew would cost lives, and was making it anyway. Defense posture, someone said. Already in it, she said. They are demanding full planetary surrender. I read it. She examined the tactical display. 14,000 ships. She did not flinch. She had never been the sort of person who flinched at numbers. Numbers were simply the geometry of a problem. "Get me a 4-hour window," she said. "For what purpose?" "To transmit a response." The room went quiet. Someone at the far end of the table spoke carefully, the way you speak to someone standing on a ledge above empty air. "Commander, the fleet alone represents a firepower index of—" "I know what it represents," she said. She raised her eyes. Her voice had not shifted. Same measured volume as always. The flat, precise cadence of a woman who had spent so many years issuing commands that anything resembling emphasis felt like a waste of air. 4 hours. Then we respond. Get the division commanders on the line. Start the clock. She stood, walked to the door, paused with one hand braced against the frame because something else had occurred to her. And one more thing, kill the civilian frequencies, all of them. News, social feeds, entertainment broadcasts, everything. That will cause panic. No, she said. It will cause confusion. Panic happens when people understand exactly what is coming. Confusion just means they cannot find their phones. She left. Corporal Damie Arach, known to everyone who mattered simply as Patch, was eating instant noodles when the alert activated. Chicken flavor, third serving of the week, which communicated something meaningful about either the supply situation or his personal decision-making. He was seated at the duty station at CFB Mackinac, Northern Alberta. Feed spread across the console, watching the screensaver drift slowly across the secondary monitor, thinking about absolutely nothing, which remained his preferred state of being. The alert sound was something he had never heard in 2 years of active duty, not the standard alarm, not the drill tones, something lower, something that moved up through the floor before it reached the speakers. He set the noodles down, looked at the primary screen. The screen displayed a number. He looked at the number for a long time. Then he picked the noodles back up, finished the last 3 forkfuls because letting hot noodles go cold was wasteful and he was not an animal. Then he placed the container in the recycling bin and pulled up the command feed. 14,000 ships. He read it twice. Then he reached into his left breast pocket and drew out the small battered notebook he kept there, green cover. Half the pages warped with water damage from a river crossing in his first year that no one was cleared to discuss. He wrote, Tuesday, 6:17 hours, aliens. Mackinac, still no good coffee. He clicked the pen closed, stood up, went to work. 4 hours and 6 minutes after the Voron broadcast reached Verdania, a single signal ascended from the planet's surface. Military frequency, encrypted, but the encryption was deliberately simple, almost insultingly so, and the Voron communications team decoded it in under 2 minutes. They had expected something, perhaps a counteroffer, perhaps pleading. Some species attempted negotiation. The Voron had an entire processing handbook section dedicated to negotiations. The signal decoded to 7 words, received, preparing response, UVDC. Narov read it, read it again, then handed it back to her aide. Log it, she said, and returned to looking out the observation port. Lens 7, monitoring from his post in the outer system, logged his own notation at 10:19 hours. Subject species has acknowledged communication. Response time 4.1 hours. Message content non-committal, tone neutral. Compliance trajectory 94.7%. No unusual indicators. Awaiting formal response. Estimated surrender 48 to 72 hours. He underlined 94.7%. He had been correct about compliance trajectories for every Class 1 species he had ever evaluated. He made another warm drink. What Lens 7 noticed at 10:34 hours was not in any handbook he owned. He was running a routine sweep of Verdania's communication spectrum, something he performed every 20 minutes purely to watch the panic evolving, because panic had a shape, a rhythm, a way of propagating from population center to population center the way fire crosses between trees with dry gaps between them. And then he realized there was nothing to watch. The spectrum was empty, not damaged, not jammed, empty. as though someone had quietly reached over and turned off the sound at its source. He checked his instruments, ran a diagnostic, checked again. Every civilian broadcast frequency on every continent had gone dark simultaneously. He had never encountered this before, not once across 31 civilizations. Species under threat did not go silent. They broadcast prayers. They transmitted final messages. They filled the spectrum with desperate political statements. They pressed every frequency they owned into service, the way wounded animals pressed every sound they possessed into the air around them, because noise was evidence of life. And life was the one argument that no species stopped making until they were no longer capable of making it. Verdania had turned off its noise, all of it together at once. The sensory tendrils along Lens 7's neck, thin, sensitive organs his species had developed for reading emotional atmosphere in shared spaces, organs with absolutely no practical function in a vacuum, but which his nervous system activated regardless, retracted fully against his skin. He opened a new log entry, anomaly detected, Verdania civilian communication spectrum offline, not disrupted, deactivated, coordinated shutdown across all landmasses simultaneously, behavior inconsistent with Class 1 threat response profile, logging as anomaly, will monitor. He highlighted the word anomaly, stared at it, below him. 40,000 kilometers below and descending in the slow curve of orbital mechanics. The night side of Verdania looked identical to any other night he had observed it from. City lights in clusters, the long dark stretches between them, the faint glow softening the coastlines, a planet that appeared to be sleeping. His instruments registered it first. Thermal signatures, small initially, then more of them, then many, rising from every continent in patterns that were not random, not the shape of panic, not the signature of a species coming apart under pressure. The geometry of something waking up, engines, his instruments confirmed, thousands of them not warming up, already warm, already running as though they had been running for some time, below the threshold of casual scanning, pointed at the sky. Waiting for exactly this moment. Addendum, Lens 7 typed. He stared at the thermal map for a long time. Addendum, revising anomaly classification. Verdania is not panicking. Verdania is not negotiating. Verdania is, he stopped. I do not have a word for this. Verdania is becoming something. I am going to need more instruments. He transmitted an emergency data request to Galactic Assembly Station. Then he did something he had not done in 200 years of observation work. He locked his station door. Aboard the Odovar, Commander Narav was eating dinner when her communications officer entered. The officer, whose name was Selk, young, skilled at the work, wore the slightly compressed expression of someone trained to carry difficult information carefully. Commander, Verdania's civilian frequencies have gone offline. Narav chewed. Offline in what sense? All of them, Commander, simultaneously, approximately 40 minutes ago. Narav set her utensil down. All of them. Yes, Commander. Narav considered this. In her experience, when a species went silent before capitulation, it meant one of two things. Either the governing structure had collapsed and there was no one left to broadcast, or the military had seized control of all communications in preparation for issuing a planet-wide compliance order. Either way, it was typically the end of organized resistance, not the beginning of something else entirely. They are preparing to comply, she said. That is one interpretation, Commander. She looked at Selk. What is another? The young officer arranged their hands in the configuration that in Voran body language indicated. I am about to say something I cannot verify, and I want that uncertainty on record. I do not know. Commander, that is the problem. Narav retrieved her utensil. Monitor and report, she said. We will have their formal response before the day is out. Selk left. Narav ate the remainder of her dinner, outside the observation port. Verdania rotated slowly on its axis the way it had been rotating for 4.5 billion years, at a pace, and with a patience that implied it was not particularly concerned about what was currently in orbit above it. Narov did not notice this. She was not the kind of person who noticed things of that nature. At 300 hours station time, Lens 7 filed a second report, 2 lines, revising Verdania threat classification, insufficient data for new rating, recommend all assembly observers in the Solon sector increase monitoring frequency. He paused, added a third line, I may have been wrong about this one. He nearly deleted it. It was not the sort of language that belonged in official documentation. Too personal, too uncertain. Not the register of 2 centuries of clean, authoritative observation. He left it in, sent the report, made another drink he barely tasted, sat down, watched Verdania turn in the dark below him. In 100 underground installations across 6 continents, in mobile units scattered through forests and high desert terrain, in 3 submarines running silent in the deep Pacific with all exterior lights extinguished. The things that had been warming up for a very long time finished warming up. Patch, in his carrier unit somewhere above the Atlantic, wrote one more line in his notebook. They have no idea what they knocked on. He clicked the pen closed. Outside the viewport the stars were very bright, very many, very quiet for now. Commander Narov was eating breakfast when the war began. The Voron equivalent of eggs, pale yellow, slightly gelatinous. A reading tablet propped against her water glass displaying the morning's political briefings, none of which she was particularly processing because she had read 10,000 political briefings across her career, and they invariably communicated the same 3 things in slightly rearranged sequences. She was bored. She was profoundly, cosmically, architecturally bored in the way that only someone who has won 23 consecutive times can be bored. Victory acquired a shape eventually, the shape of a Tuesday morning, pale eggs, a reading tablet, the distant vibration of a fleet so vast its combined mass bent gravitational calculations. Her communications officer knocked. Commander, Verdania has gone active. Narov scrolled a page on her tablet. Define active. Launches, Commander, multiple. We are still cataloging. Missiles? Not exactly, Commander. She looked up then, not because she was alarmed, because not exactly from a communications officer was the sort of grammatical construction that required a face behind it to interpret correctly. Come in, she said. Lens 7 registered it first. His instruments were more sensitive now. He had spent the previous 4 hours adding instruments because something about Verdania's thermal map had settled under his exoskeleton and refused to leave. Because he was, and he would not enter this in his report, but he felt it in the shallow flutter of his breathing, afraid. The launches originated from everywhere, not from military facilities only, not from the defense sites his preliminary survey had identified as weapons adjacent. Everywhere, forests, open ocean, desert, subterranean locations that had shown 0 surface signature until the precise instant they opened. He watched the map, and it resembled nothing so much as a planet turning itself inside out, like watching something that had been folded very tightly, very carefully, for a very long time, unfold all at once with practiced certainty. He began to count. He stopped counting. His instruments continued without him. 4,200,000 and a number still accruing when the first wave struck the Voron fleet. Point defense was the Voron's most refined technology. 4 centuries of development. Targeting systems capable of tracking a 2-meter projectile at 40,000 kilometers. Response times measured in fractions of a second. Overlapping fields of fire that left no gap wider than a standard shuttle. In 23 engagements, no incoming ordnance had ever contacted a Voron hull. This was not ordnance. Each unit was the size of a closed fist. Each unit contained no metal, no explosive payload, no thermal signature above the ambient temperature of surrounding space. They approached in loose, irregular formations that the targeting software cycled through 17 classification attempts on in the first 2 seconds. settling on debris field before the officer watching the screen overrode it quietly, stating that debris field does not accelerate. Point defense eliminated 200,000 of them in the first 8 seconds, efficiently, precisely. It killed exactly as many as its overlapping fields could process in that window, and then the remaining 4 million crossed the threshold and hit the fleet, not to destroy, to eat. Patch felt it before he understood it. He was strapped into the jump seat of a transport carrier over the mid-Atlantic. 11 other soldiers beside him performing various versions of the same act, staring at something near their boots, breathing in a particular controlled way, not speaking. The carrier interior was dark except for the instrument panels and a thin strip of emergency lighting along the floor that rendered everyone's face the color of old bruises. The readout on his wrist unit changed. Numbers, ship counts, status indicators cycling from green to yellow to red in patterns that began slowly and then did not. He watched it for a while, drew out his notebook. 9:18 hours. First contact plus 4 hours. The mathematics are happening. Do not look at the mathematics if you intend to sleep again. He clicked the pen. The soldier beside him, a woman named Castillo, Sao Paulo, who never spent words on things that did not merit them, which in Patch's assessment made her one of the finest human beings he had personally encountered across 2 years of service, looked at the wrist readout and said quietly, 3,000. He looked at her. 3,000 gone, she said. He checked his own readout. She was not wrong. 3,114 Voran ships had gone dark, not destroyed, not burning, dark, silent, blind and deaf and full of crew who were attempting to determine what was happening to their sensor arrays, their communication systems, their navigation beacons, trying to locate the things, dismantling them with hands that could not feel anything smaller than a standard tool. The units were smaller than a standard tool. Patch wrote, Nats. They sent Nats, 4 million Nats. He stared at that for a moment. We sent Nats to fight the fleet that arrived to end us. Remarkable. Narov reached the command deck in time to watch the 6th ship go dark. She stood at the main display and she was very still in the way that predators are still. Not calm, not frozen, concentrated, everything directed inward toward whatever calculations were moving behind her eyes. Get me a count, she said. Commander, the count is. Get it. 3,400. Commander, in the first. The officer checked his display in the first 40 seconds. Narov studied the readout. The display had shown 14,000 green indicators when they arrived. It showed just above 10,000 now. The red indicators were not exploding. They were not returning fire. They were simply going red, quietly, one following another, like someone walking a very long corridor switching off lights as they went. What is targeting us? She said. We do not. What is targeting us? Something small, Commander. We cannot achieve a clear scan. Whatever the composition is, it is not registering. They are clearing the point defense because the point defense was not designed for. The officer stopped, reorganized. We were not designed for this. Narov processed that. Options. We could withdraw to high orbit, outside launch range. Then they hold the atmosphere. No. We could. The display registered another contact. A 7th ship went dark, then an 8th, then 3 simultaneously. Lens 7 had stopped writing notes. He was simply watching. A secondary monitor beside him displayed his own report from 4 hours prior, the one with 94.7% underlined. He had written it with the settled certainty of someone who had been correct 31 consecutive times. It sat on the screen beside the tactical feed, and the juxtaposition was producing something inside him that he did not have a clean word for. He watched Verdania's second wave launch. Different profile. Larger, faster, clear metallic signatures. These ones the Voran sensors could track, which Lens 7 initially registered as an improvement in targeting odds for the defense systems. And then he understood what the second wave was for. The first wave had consumed the eyes and ears and voices. The second wave was for the ships that could no longer see it coming. He watched 10,000 Voran vessels attempt to coordinate a response with no sensors, no communications, no navigation data. He watched them fire on each other twice. He watched 3 ships attempt to enter fold space and collide in the dark. He opened a new log. Hour 1, Voran fleet compromised, Verdanian losses, none confirmed, tactical analysis. Verdania did not attack the fleet. Verdania attacked the fleet's capacity to comprehend what was being done to it. There is a meaningful distinction. I am still working out what the distinction means. He paused. The distinction is this. You can fight something that is attempting to kill you. You cannot fight something that is attempting to confuse you, because confusion is not a position. You cannot hold a line against it. You cannot retreat from it. You are simply inside it. The Voran are inside it. He saved the entry, opened a new one. Hour 1 addendum. Verdanian losses, 14 personnel, 14 in 1 hour against this fleet. He stared at the number 14. He could not make it occupy the space it should occupy in his understanding. A number that small set against a context this vast did not resolve into sense. It sat in his mind like a stone dropped into water that declined to sink, floating there, turning slowly, waiting for him to construct a framework capable of holding it. He transmitted an emergency signal to the Galactic Assembly. It contained coordinates. 1 word, watch. Patch's carrier breached atmosphere at 10:41 hours. He felt it, the shudder, the pressure shift. The way sound returned from nothing to something as air came back around them. The strip lighting flickered. Someone across the hold said something in a language he did not catch. Castillo was asleep. She could sleep through anything. He had personally observed her sleep through a fire alarm and the subsequent small actual fire it had been announcing. He envied that skill without reservation. His wrist readout showed 4,400. He had not meant to look. He had made a deliberate decision not to look. The mathematics would continue whether he observed them or not. He looked anyway. 4,400 Voran ships dark or destroyed in a single hour. He thought about his grandfather, a man who had sayings that Patch had always assumed were the compressed wisdom of old age, the kind that sounds meaningful and evaporates on examination when you are young and believe you already know the shape of things. Do not start a fight with someone who has been waiting for you. He wrote it in the notebook, looked at it, thought, Granddad, you had no idea. The carrier banked. Through the small porthole across the hold he had a view of nothing, of the wall, of Castillo's sleeping face. Someone else had the porthole with the view, and he heard them make a sound, not words, just a sound. The particular catch in the throat that belongs to a person encountering something for which they have not yet developed vocabulary. What Patch said. The soldier with the porthole, new transfer, name Patch had read, Oaken Samuels from Lagos like him, which meant they would either become close or drive each other to absolute ruin, looked back. The sky, Oaken said. What about it? It is full. Patch unbuckled his strap, stood, leaned across the hold to the porthole. Outside in the upper atmosphere the second wave was still rising. He had known the numbers. He had watched the readouts. Numbers and readouts are a particular way of knowing something without feeling it. He had been depending on that distinction for the past 2 hours, but here was the thing itself, not a number. The sky filled in columns rising from every direction visible to him, spreading into the black at the edge of atmosphere. The geometry of it so enormous it bent perspective. Made the horizon feel like a minor detail rather than a boundary. Made the planet below feel like it was reaching upward, like something that had been pressed down for a very long time was now standing. He watched it for a long time. Oaken said, you know what it resembles. Do not say it. It looks like. I know what it looks like. Patch went back to his seat, sat down, picked up the notebook, wrote. They came 400 light years to die confused. Their error was not coming. Their error was coming certain. He underlined certain, clicked the pen. Outside, 40,000 kilometers above him, the fleet that had arrived certain was becoming a different shape entirely, one ship at a time, each one quiet, each one dark, like someone who enters a room in absolute command of himself and discovers when he gets there that the furniture has been rearranged, that the lights are out, that the floor is somewhere other than where floors are supposed to be. Like that, except the room was Verdania, and Verdania had been rearranging things in the dark for a very long time. Patch's boots touched alien ground at 3:40 hours local. He stood there for a moment, just stood. The ground was the color of old rust and it gave slightly underfoot, like compacted sand over something softer beneath. And the sky above it was wrong, not wrong in a damaging way, just wrong in the way things are wrong when your entire life a sky has been one color and now it is not. The Odovar system's sun sat further from this planet than Solon did from Verdania. It lit the surface the way a lamp with a failing element lights a room, enough to see by, not enough to trust completely. He looked at it, pulled out the notebook. 3:40 hours local, alien sun, still no good coffee. Ground feels like walking on a bruise. He clicked the pen. Castillo landed behind him, boots finding the rust-colored ground without needing to look, the way she did everything, as though the world was expected to arrange itself appropriately and generally did. She examined the sky. She said. That was her entire assessment of a planet 40 light years from everything she had ever known. Patch thought that was precisely right. The Galactic Assembly observed through Lens 7's feed, all 47 delegates. This was not standard procedure. Assembly observation sessions were filed, archived, reviewed later by analysts who produced papers that other analysts read and filed and reviewed in turn. They were not attended in real time. They were not watched the way you watch something you are afraid to stop looking at. But Lens 7's emergency signal had reached assembly station at 200 hours, and by 2:30 the chamber was at capacity. No session had been called. They simply arrived. They stood at the feed and watched a Verdanian fleet pursue the retreating Voron into fold space, and no one spoke, because no one possessed a framework for what they were observing. And you do not comment on something for which you have no framework. You simply watch. The eldest delegate, Savara Kelm, 1400 years of service, a being who had watched civilizations form and collapse and who maintained an emotional register so controlled that junior delegates had occasionally verified her vital signs, stood in the back corner with her hands folded and her attention on the feed. Lens 7, watching the chamber on his secondary monitor, noted that Kelm's sensory filaments were moving, barely, the way a person's hands move when they are making a considerable effort not to reveal that their hands are shaking. He logged this, did not know what to make of it, logged it regardless. The strategy was not present in any Voron military doctrine on record for Class 1 species. The strategy was not present in any Galactic Assembly military doctrine on record for any species. The Verdanian fleet did not halt at the edge of Voron space, did not establish a perimeter, did not transmit demands, did not do the thing that every species in documented history had done upon pressing an aggressor back to their own border, which was stop. Because the border held meaning, because borders marked the threshold between we defended ourselves and we became something else entirely. The Verdanian fleet crossed the border 40 light years from home, pursuing a retreating force into their own staging system, and they crossed it without decelerating. The assembly chamber produced a sound, not language, just sound. The collective exhale of 47 species who had until this moment been managing their understanding of events into a shape they could hold. Lens 7 was already typing. Hour 6. Verdanian counter-incursion confirmed. Fleet has entered Voron staging system. Designation Orath 3. 3 inhabited planets with military infrastructure, weapons facilities, shipyards, manufacturing operations currently producing additional fleet units. Analysis pending. He stopped, stared at the feed. Verdania is not targeting the production facilities. Verdania is not bombing the factories. Patch's unit moved through the factory floor in a line, not fast, not slow. The pace of people who have spent considerable time thinking about this particular sequence of actions. Not here, not tonight, somewhere else, somewhere quiet, somewhere with maps and coffee and arguments about approach vectors. The factory was enormous, Voron scale. The ceiling sat so high above them it had developed its own weather. A thin cold suspended up there that was not quite cloud, but was not cloud either. The machines were still operating when they arrived, still running. The technical workers, civilian personnel, not combatants, had departed in a manner that communicated both speed and organization, which told Patch something about the nature of the Voron as a species beneath the fleet and the flags. The machines produced a sound like a city breathing. He had expected more. He was not sure what more meant precisely, more resistance, more something. Instead, there was just the enormous breathing space and his unit spreading across it in the practiced geometry of people trained for exactly this. And he found himself doing what they had been briefed to do, taking it apart, panel by panel, component by component, hands and tools and careful deliberate work, not destroying, cataloging first, then removing. The engineers moved ahead of his unit, identifying, tagging. Behind them came the loaders. Behind the loaders came the haulers, and it was the most systematically organized thing Patch had ever been part of, which carried some weight given that the Nigerian army had once coordinated a 40-vehicle convoy through Lagos at peak hour, and that had also been genuinely impressive. He pulled a panel open. Interior circuitry he did not recognize, dense, intricate, the product of centuries of refinement, not superior to Verdanian engineering. Different. The way two solutions to the same problem look when they have never previously occupied the same room. He tagged it, moved to the next panel. 5-12 hours, he wrote during a brief pause while the haulers caught up, dismantling their factory the way a curious child dismantles a clock, except the clock spent last week attempting to end our civilization. He looked at that. Actually, not different from a curious child and a clock at all. He moved to the next panel. Commander Thessaly Narov's message reached the Voron garrison on Orath 4 at 600 hours. She wrote it herself. Did not pass it to communications to refine or formalize. It was already as flat as it needed to be. Her voice was always flat. The message read, "You have 6 hours to evacuate your civilian population. Military personnel may surrender or withdraw. We are not here for your people. We are here for your infrastructure. The clock begins when you read this." Commander T. Narov, UVDC. She sat in the temporary command post, a prefab unit, 3 rooms, a folding table, a coffee maker that Sergeant Adami had transported personally from Lagos because certain things were not negotiable, and she waited. Her aide asked, "Do you believe they will comply?" She picked up her coffee, "Yes." "How can you be certain?" She considered this, not because she was uncertain, because she was trying to locate the version of the answer worth saying aloud, because they are not unintelligent, she said. They made an unintelligent decision. That is a different matter. Her aide absorbed this, and if they do not comply. She set the coffee down, pressed her left thumb in circles, 2 seconds. "Then we made the offer," she said. They complied. 5 hours and 58 minutes after the message arrived. The last Voron military transport lifted from Orath 4's surface. Len 7 tracked it from his station. One indicator among many. He watched it depart, watched the planet below it go still and empty. He pulled up the thermal map. Verdanian activity ongoing. Not weapon signatures, not the profile of bombardment or territorial seizure, or the particular heat geometry of a species planting a flag. The profile of people working, still dismantling, still loading. Still moving through corridors and across factory floors with the steady, organized intention of a species that had decided to take something home with it and intended to complete the job before it left. Keln said from the back of the assembly chamber, "They are not bombing." Nobody answered. It was not a question. They gave them 6 hours, she said. Still not a question. She was watching the feed. Her sensory filaments had gone still again, but still in a different way than before, not flat, not the professional composure of 1400 years of managed observation, the stillness of a mind actively recalculating. They have the capability to end this system. A delegate to her left said, I have run the projections. I know, she said, then why? I do not know. She turned from the feed for the first time since the session opened, looked at the room. 47 species, 47 sets of eyes and sensory organs and receptor arrays, all of them performing variations of the same internal action she was performing, attempting to place Verdania in a category that held. They are not interested in this planet, she said. They are interested in what was constructed here, and they gave the inhabitants time to leave before they collected it. Lens 7, watching the secondary monitor, wrote, Keln does not voice conclusions she has not fully examined. She has been examining this for 6 hours. Log, she does not have an answer. In 200 years of records, I cannot locate a single instance of Keln without an answer. Patch was consuming a protein bar on the steps of what had formerly been the garrison's command building when Narov walked past. He stood. She gestured him back down without looking at him. As you were, Corporal, he sat. She entered the building. He watched the door for a moment, then looked back out at the manufacturing district. The haulers were still in motion. The sky was doing the thing it had been doing all day. That failing lamp color. That quality of light that seemed to be apologizing for something it had no control over. He thought about his grandfather again. Not the saying this time. Just the man himself. Old house in Suruller. Walls covered in photographs of people Patch had never met. Family that predated photography. A whole chain of human beings who had survived things that should have finished them and had somehow produced at the end of that long chain a 23-year-old corporal eating a protein bar on an alien planet 40 light years from the street where his grandfather had grown his tomatoes. He thought, Grandad, you would not believe this Tuesday. Then he thought, you would absolutely believe this Tuesday. Castillo sat down beside him. They watched the haulers for a while in silence. You know what they thought, she said. Which part? All of it, the whole decision, coming here. She chewed her own protein bar. They examined us and saw a species incapable of agreeing on anything. Different nations, different languages, fighting among ourselves, could not possibly coordinate a coherent response. They were not technically incorrect. No, we just, she paused, thought about it, we coordinate when it genuinely matters. Patch nodded, wrote in the notebook. Grandad used to say, do not start a fight with someone who has nothing left to lose. These Vorons started a fight with 8 billion people who had everything to lose. Turns out that is the same calculation. When everything is on the line, even people who disagree on everything agree on that. He stared at it, added, maybe especially then. The ceasefire request arrived at 2100 hours, formally constructed, properly formatted, every diplomatic code in its correct position. Whoever had drafted it on the Voron side had done so with scrupulous care. The way you execute a procedure when you need the record to confirm you followed it correctly. It reached the UVDC at 2100 hours and 11 seconds. The response went out at 2111 hours, 11 minutes, not 72 hours. Not a day, not a chamber vote with 17 subcommittees and revisions, 11 minutes. The response was 5 words, received, we will finish first, UVDC. In the assembly chamber, the delegate who had been most vocal in previous sessions, a Tresh delegate named Varric Oro, experienced enough to hold opinions but not quite seasoned enough to know when to withhold them, said, that is not a ceasefire acceptance, that is a schedule. Keln said, yes. He looked at her. They are informing the Voron when this will conclude, she said. Not asking, informing. When they have finished taking what they came to take, they will go home. She returned her attention to the feed. They are honoring their commitment to the civilian population. They will honor this as well. You sound as though you respect them. I'm afraid of them, she said. The chamber fell quiet. Kelm, 1400 years, 31 species observed, wars witnessed, civilizations catalogued. The being for whom the concept of afraid had across 14 centuries become largely a theoretical classification, not because of the weapons. She continued before anyone could form a question, not because of the ships or the drones or the strategic capability. She looked at the feed. Verdanians moving through an alien facility in the dark, methodical, organized, thorough. Taking what they had come for and leaving everything else intact, because they know precisely what they are doing, she said, and precisely when to stop. Len 7 alone in his locked station did not write anything for a considerable stretch of time. Then, addendum, final notation before I sleep. They could have ended a species today. They sent a schedule instead. He saved it, looked out the viewport. Verdania's sun was a dot from this distance, a thoroughly unremarkable star, one among several 100 billion in this galaxy alone, most of which hosted nothing at all, some of which had hosted things that burned intensely for a century and went dark, a small number of which had hosted things that survived long enough to reach the stars, one of which hosted this. He turned off the light, slept badly, dreamed in the formless way that was particular to Lens 7, of a planet rearranging furniture in the dark, getting everything precisely right before anyone arrived, the way a place prepares itself when it has been expecting company for a very long time. The list was 2,241 names long. Narav read it the way she read everything, straight through, no skipping, no scanning ahead. Each name received the same count of time, not equal time, the same time. The distinction mattered to her in a way she had never explained to anyone and did not intend to begin explaining now. It took 3 hours and 14 minutes. When she finished, she closed the file, sat. The coffee had been cold for 2 hours. She drank it anyway. Patch came home on a Wednesday. Lagos. The airport carried the smell of diesel and fruit and the particular humid weight of air that had been breathed by too many people for too long. He walked through arrivals with his bag over one shoulder and his notebook in his breast pocket, and he located his mother at the barrier before she found him, which was how it always went. She possessed the gift of looking everywhere at once. He possessed the gift of seeing her before she turned. She turned. He raised one hand. She walked to him. Neither of them said anything. She placed one hand against the side of his face the way she had done since he was 3 years old and had come home with a cut above his eye from a fall she had not been present to witness. The particular touch of a woman conducting inventory. He was there. He was all there. She lowered her hand. "Come," she said, "I made rice." He followed her out into the heat. The jollof was better than anything on Orath 4. He would not have said so in front of Castillo, who held opinions about Brazilian cooking that she defended with the energy of someone constitutionally unable to consider the alternative. But it was true, and he held it quietly in his chest like something warm and private. His mother sat across from him and watched him eat. This was her version of an operational debrief. She had never asked him about his service in 2 years, not in a single communication, not once. She asked about his sleep, his food, his feet, because her working theory of the human body was that if those 3 things were properly managed, everything else would eventually find its own equilibrium. He had concluded she was probably right. "You are thin," she said. "A little. The food up there." He looked at her, she looked back, clear, unbothered up there, as though he had been posted to Abuja. "It was fine," he said. She refilled his bowl without asking. He ate. Outside, the street performed what Lagos streets perform in early evening, noise accumulating in layers, a generator somewhere nearby, music from a window 2 stories up, someone laughing at something that was genuinely funny, the city perpetually demonstrating its own existence as though it required an audience to confirm it was real. He had been 40 light years from it. It had been 11 weeks. The street sounded exactly the same as it always had. He thought, some things do not update. Some things simply remain. He did not write that in the notebook. Some things belonged in the notebook and some things belonged inside. The line between them was one he had drawn himself and maintained carefully and would not discuss if asked. The Galactic Assembly convened at 900 hours station time, all 47 species. The chamber had a capacity of 60 delegates and was using all 60 seats. This had not occurred within Len 7's institutional memory. He was present in observer capacity, which meant he occupied a chair slightly too small for him to the left of the main floor and took notes. He was always taking notes. He had stopped trusting his unassisted recollection some time ago. The first item on the agenda was reclassification, not Verdania's classification, everyone's. The Tresh delegate Varric Oru opened it. He had been almost vocal in the previous session and appeared to have used the intervening weeks to commit fully. Every Class 1 assessment in this assembly's database was constructed on the same analytical model. He said, "The model is wrong. We are requesting a comprehensive audit of every civilization currently rated non-threatening." Silence, not the silence of disagreement. The silence of a room containing 47 species who had all privately in their own stations and ships and home offices already performed the same calculation and arrived at the same conclusion and were relieved that someone else had said it aloud first. "How many assessments?" someone asked. 412. The silence changed quality. "We cannot," someone said, "reclassify 412 civilizations on the basis of." "On the basis of what?" Oru said. "On the basis of having been comprehensively wrong about one. On the basis of the fact that our threat model does not account for." He consulted his notes, which Len 7 suspected were a prop, because Oru did not look like someone who required notes. Accumulated historical trauma, coordinated planetary psychology, or the cognitive profile of a species that has survived contact with itself for 300,000 years. He was reading from Len 7's report. Len 7 made a note of that. "We need time," someone said. "Every Class 1 species in this database has less time than we believed." Oru replied, "That is the entire point." Keln spoke. She had not spoken until now. "The audit begins today," she said. That was all. The item closed. The Vorin transmitted their peace terms through the standard assembly channel at 1400 hours. The format was impeccable. The documentation seals were correctly placed. It carried the exhausted precision of something produced by individuals accustomed to prevailing who were now for the first time in living memory writing something else, and were ensuring that every single element of procedure was correct, because the correctness of the documentation was the last dignity available to them. The assembly anticipated that Verdania's response would be territorial. That was the word that circulated through the informal conversations in the hours before the terms arrived. Territorial. A species that had just won decisively would want land, resources, formal acknowledgement of submission, some combination of the three that could be arranged into a lasting monument to the fact of winning. Verdania's terms arrived at 1600 hours. 3 points. Len 7 read them, read them again, then wrote them verbatim in his notes because he did not trust paraphrase to carry what they were. 1. Return all surveillance data collected during the precontact observation period. 2. Grant Verdania observer status in the Galactic Assembly. 3. No contact with Verdania for 50 years unless contact is initiated by Verdania. That was all. No territorial claims, no reparations, no formal Vorin submission ceremony of the kind the Tresh had required from the Velmarite after the Outer Reach conflict, which had encompassed 17 symbolic acts and a public recitation of a document of accountability that consumed 4 hours of broadcast time on 7 frequencies. 3 sentences. Oru read them and said, "This is a joke." Keln said, "It is not. They prevailed. They could take. They do not want it," she said. "Then what do they want?" She was quiet for a moment, to be left alone. She said, "To become whatever they are going to become without observation." The chamber held that. "And the 50 years," someone said. "Insurance," Len 7 said. Everyone looked at him. He was not authorized to speak in session. He was an observer. He spoke anyway. They are not afraid of us returning. They demonstrated that with considerable clarity. The 50 years is space, room. They want to develop without needing to explain themselves to anyone. He looked at his notes. They showed us what they are under pressure. Now they want time to establish what they are without it. The chamber was quiet. Then Keln said, "Accept all three." Nobody disagreed. Narov was in her office when the terms were formally ratified. Her aide entered, told her. She nodded, said, "Thank you." The aide left. She sat. The office was nearly empty. She had been packing for 2 days, slow, methodical, the kind of packing that functions simultaneously as accounting, books, documents, 3 citations in frames she had never mounted on a wall, a plant that had survived 11 months of irregular attention, which she found genuinely admirable, and the photograph. It was near the bottom of the second box, which is where things go when you are not ready to encounter them but also not ready to leave them behind. Her daughter. Age 7, standing in the garden of the Accra house, holding a telescope she had built herself from cardboard tubing and the lenses salvaged from a pair of broken binoculars, holding it pointed at the sky, eyes narrowed, completely serious, the expression of a person who has determined that the sky is a problem requiring a solution and has decided that she is the one who will provide it. Narov lifted the photograph, held it, did not think about the 2,241 names. She had already done that. 3 hours and 14 minutes of doing that. Whatever needed to happen inside her as a result had begun happening and would continue happening and did not require her supervision or intervention or authorization. She thought about the telescope instead, cardboard and salvaged glass. Her daughter had seen something in the sky that she wanted to get closer to. She had not waited for proper equipment. She had assembled inadequate equipment and used it anyway. Narov placed the photograph in her bag, stood, looked at the empty walls, turned off the light. Lens 7 filed his report at 2300 hours. It was the longest document he had ever produced, longer than the cross-species behavioral study he had contributed to in his 43rd year, longer than the complete Mervani conflict documentation, longer than the cumulative field notes from his first decade of observation work. He nearly removed the final paragraph, not because it was inaccurate, because it was the most personal thing he had ever placed in an official document, and he had spent 200 years maintaining his official documents at the same controlled temperature as everything else in his professional life. Low, measured, correct. He left it in. Note final. During the closing stages of the engagement, 4 Verdanian weapon systems were fully charged, targeted, and held. The targets were Voron population centers. The systems possessed confirmed firing solutions. Verdania held them for 40 minutes, then stood them down. I have completed the analysis. Those 4 systems would have ended the Voron as a species, not their fleet, not their military capability, the species. Verdania had the outcome. They chose not to take it. I have observed 31 civilizations across 200 years. I have watched species choose to spare an adversary exactly twice in that time. Both instances of restraint were tactical. Calculated mercy extended because the continued existence of the enemy represented more utility than their elimination. I cannot locate the calculation Verdania made. They gave civilian populations 6 hours to depart. They removed the infrastructure and left the planets intact. They transmitted 3 peace terms and requested 50 years of quiet. They had the outcome and they went home. I do not know what to do with this information. I am aware that not knowing what to do with information is not an appropriate way to conclude an official report. I am concluding it this way regardless. He saved it, sent it, made a drink he did not particularly want, stood at the viewport somewhere in the dark, 40 light years away. Verdania was a small blue point orbiting an ordinary star. It was not doing anything observable from this distance. It was simply existing the way it had been existing for 4.5 billion years, before the Voron, before the assembly. Before Lens 7 had filed his first routine report and consumed his first cup of something brewed on a world nobody produced it on anymore. He had that thought, and then a different thought arrived, sharp and lateral, the kind that comes without announcing itself. They could have ended a species. They went home instead. He did not resolve this. No resolution existed that he could locate. It stayed in him the way the name of something stays when you do not yet have the word for it. Something occupying the space between the most dangerous thing he had ever observed and the most. The most what? The most something. He stood at the viewport for a very long time. Outside, the stars were the same stars they had always been. They looked different. He did not write that down. Some things were for inside. The signal left Verdania at 1 hour on a Thursday. No announcement accompanied it, no formal ceremony, no coordinated countdown broadcast anywhere. In a building that appeared on no public registry, someone pressed a key, and what had been assembled across 6 months of careful argument-filled quiet construction went out into the dark at the speed of light. On every frequency the Galactic Assembly monitored, addressed to no one specifically, which meant everyone. Lens 7 was asleep when it arrived. He sensed it before he heard it, a resonance in the station's receiver array, a shift in the ambient frequency that his sleeping body registered as unusual but not threatening. The way you sense a door closing in another room without fully waking. He woke, looked at the receiver, looked at the origin coordinates, sat up. The transmission was 4 hours and 17 minutes in duration. He listened to the first 40 seconds and then stopped. Not because he did not want to hear it, because he needed to be positioned differently. He moved from the cot to the chair at the main console, the proper chair, the one he occupied when he was working, when he was thinking, when what was before him required the kind of attention that cannot be given from somewhere comfortable. He started again from the beginning. It opened with sound, not one kind, not a curated representative sample assembled by committee to present a balanced cultural portrait. All of it, stacked and overlapping and bleeding into itself. Something with percussion that landed like a physical dispute, and something with strings that produced a specific pain. The pain of things that are beautiful and that you know will end. And beneath both of those something older still. A single voice in a language Lens 7's translation systems could not parse. Singing the way people sing when they believe no one is listening, which is the only version of singing that is entirely true. It continued for 6 minutes, then stopped. A child laughing, 3 seconds, then a man's voice, low, telling a joke in a language Lens 7 recognized, from the coastal region of the large western continent. The punchline arrived and someone off-signal laughed before it landed, the laugh of someone who already knew the joke and could not manage to suppress their response to it. Then that stopped too. Lens 7 stopped taking notes at the 11-minute mark. He had been trained to take notes. 200 years of training. You observe, you record, you file. The notes are the occupation. The notes are the only thing that outlasts you, and you are the only thing that outlasts the moment. So the sequence is moment, observer, notes, record, time. He stopped. His hands remained on the console. He listened. A city after rain, someone running, not from anything. The sound of it was wrong for fear, toward something perhaps, or for the sensation of motion itself. Feet on wet surfaces, breathing hard. The city expanding around the runner in the way cities expand at night when most of the population has gone inside. Running because the body wanted to, because it was capable of it. A medical facility. Lens 7 knew the acoustic signature of those spaces. He had documented enough of them, the particular silence that is not empty but held, a measuring instrument operating somewhere, and then a hand, the sound of a hand locating another hand in the dark, the small and unmistakable sound of fingers closing, and a voice saying nothing beyond. Present, still here with you. Lens 7's sensory tendrils extended fully. He had not felt that response in a very long time. He did not retract them. The transmission did not organize itself. This was the thing that kept catching in him. Every diplomatic broadcast he had ever received from a species making first contact with the assembly had possessed structure. Introduction, credentials, cultural summary, political statement, request. The architecture of a species presenting itself as it wished to be perceived. This had no architecture. It had the shape of a life, not one life. Many, all of them assembled without explanation or transition. Each one ending before it resolved. Each one leaving a small open space where the listener was required to put something of themselves to close it. A woman planting something in ground that was not particularly good ground for planting. Her hands working the soil with the focus of someone who has made a private agreement with time itself. I will do this now, and something will come of it later that I will not be present to witness. The patience of it, the absolute commitment of it, a person choosing to participate in time on time's own terms. Lens 7 did not have a word for what that produced in him. He was 200 years old. He had assumed he possessed vocabulary for most things. A funeral, rain on a roof, people singing something slow and communal, the kind of song that requires bodies in a room together to function properly. That does not work in the version you attempt alone, and beneath the singing. Grief that was not performing anything, not composed, not shaped for presentation, not managed, simply present. Grief existing as itself in a room full of beings who were grieving together, because the alternative was grieving alone. And they had collectively decided against that. Then a celebration, without pause, the same room, the same gathering, the same sound transformed, faster, lifted. And Lens 7 understood then what Verdania had transmitted, not a presentation, a confession. At 3 hours and 44 minutes, a crowd, enormous, he could hear the scale of it before he could interpret it. The way a very large number of gathered bodies changes the air around them, makes the air into something denser, something that carries differently. They were witnessing a contest, a match. His translation systems confirmed. One side achieved something decisive, and the crowd. He had observed 31 civilizations. He had been present in cities when things went well for them, when the collective held its breath and released it, when thousands of separate individuals became for 30 seconds a single undivided thing. He had never heard anything like this particular sound. It was not the volume. It was the quality, pure, like a sustained note from an instrument without a name. Then it faded. The participants moved again. The crowd resolved back into many separate beings. A demonstration in a public way. He recognized the shape of it, people, signs, voices raised, the organized energy of a species arguing with itself in public because accepting the alternative was unacceptable to it. Not violent, specific about what it wanted. The signs were in 6 different languages. The chanting was in 3. And yet they were all saying the same thing, which was, this is wrong, and we will not pretend it is not wrong, and we will stand here in the rain until something changes. Rain again. It rained often in the transmission. Lens 7 began to suspect the rain was not incidental. 4 hours and 9 minutes. A yard somewhere. Evening. Insects. The slow settling sound of a settlement cooling after the day's heat. A very young child, recently walking, still at the stage where each step represented an active renegotiation with the force of gravity rather than a settled agreement with it. The child walked, fell. A breath somewhere nearby. An adult watching, not moving. The particular held breath of someone who has made the decision to let the falling happen. Because the getting up is the entire point. The child got up, walked, fell, got up again. Lens 7 realized he had been holding his breath. He released it. The child walked 4 steps, 5, 6, a wobble, 7, and then a sound from the adult, not words, something before words. The sound a body produces when it has been working very hard not to celebrate ahead of schedule and has just lost that effort entirely. The child fell again, laughed, got up. Then Narav's voice. He recognized it. He had processed every UVDC broadcast from the engagement, every command frequency recording, 200 hours of her voice at the same controlled level. The voice of a woman who had concluded that tone was a finite resource and would not be squandered. Same voice. same volume. We did not want this war. We won it regardless. We could have gone further. We did not. This is what we are. We are going to be present out here now. We believed you should know us before you make any decisions. Silence, 4 hours and 17 minutes of transmission and then nothing, just the carrier frequency. The signal still open. Verdania still transmitting. Silence. The assembly chamber received it at 900 hours station time. All 47 species. No session had been called. They came the same way they had come for the engagement feed, drawn by something that had not yet acquired a name. The feeling that this was not information to receive second-hand later. They listened. Len 7 watched them on the secondary monitor. He watched Oru, vocal, constitutionally incapable of stillness, sit completely still for 4 hours and 17 minutes. He watched delegates he had never seen make physical contact with each other, small contact, a hand on a forearm, a shoulder pressed to a shoulder, species that did not share physical proximity sharing it. He watched Keln, in the back corner, same corner as always, hands folded. The professional composure of 1400 years, at the section with the child walking, 4 hours and 9 minutes, her hands opened. She pressed them flat against the surface in front of her, looked at them, as though confirming something. The session ended at 14:18 hours. No one spoke for 40 seconds after the transmission closed. Then Keln said to no one in particular, her voice doing something that no recording in Len 7's institutional memory showed it doing. They grieve. A breath. They still grieve and they plant things regardless. For 11 days, no species contacted Verdania. Not the Vorin, not the Assembly, not the 17 civilizations that had been quietly upgrading their diplomatic monitoring of the Solon system since the engagement concluded. Not the 3 species that had been drafting formal introduction transmissions for 6 months and had been waiting for what they considered the appropriate moment. 11 days. The silence was not fear. Len 7 was certain of this. He had heard fear silence before, the quiet of species that had received a threat and gone to ground, the held breath quiet of civilizations in the process of deciding whether to comply or escape. He had logged that particular silence 31 times. This was different. This was the silence of 47 species sitting with something they had been given and did not want to set down yet. The silence of not wanting to be the first to speak because speaking would end something, because the thing they had been given was complete in itself, and the appropriate response to a thing that is complete in itself is not words, not immediately. First, you sit with it. Patch did not know about the silence until his mother mentioned it. She had been following the assembly feeds. As it emerged, she had been following them since before he shipped out, which he had suspected and had never asked about because some things are better left unverified. She came into the kitchen on the 4th day of the 11 while he was making eggs and said without preamble, "Nobody is speaking." He looked up. "Out there," she said, after the broadcast. Nobody said anything. He considered this. Good. He said. She looked at him. "They are thinking," he said. She watched him in the way she had always watched him. Inventory, assessment. The swift calculation of a woman who had spent years raising something she did not entirely understand and had made her peace with that. She said. She sat down at the table. He made eggs for her too. Len 7 filed his final report on day 12. He had been composing it across the 11 days of silence. A few lines at a time. The way you write something you are not prepared to finish. Each day he added. Each day he did not send it. On day 12, he finished the final paragraph and transmitted it before he could reconsider. The final paragraph. I have observed 31 civilizations across 200 years. I have witnessed species discover what they are capable of, and species forget it. I have watched things that called themselves civilized do things that carry no name. I have filed reports. I have consumed beverages produced on worlds that produce them no longer. I have been careful and I have been correct. I have measured threat by the shape of weapons and the dimensions of fleets. And I have been measuring the wrong things the entire time. Verdania transmitted a child learning to walk. They transmitted rain and a funeral, and a crowd briefly united because someone accomplished something with tremendous precision. They transmitted a hand finding another hand in the dark, and a woman planting trees whose growth she would not witness. They sent it unencrypted on every frequency, addressed to no one specifically, which meant everyone. They showed us what they are made of, not the weapons, not the fleet, the other thing. The thing beneath the weapons that gives the weapons their meaning, the particular Verdanian terror of losing what they love, and what they will do because of it, and how far they will go because of it, and how carefully they will stop because of it. Classification revised. New classification, unclassifiable notes field. I do not have another word for it. I attempted to locate one. Human will have to do. End of report. He sent it, closed the console, sat back. Outside the viewport, the stars were exactly what they had always been. Indifferent, numerous, old in the way that makes everything else feel like a brief exchange happening in a room they have not yet noticed. He looked at them, thought about the child, 6 steps, a wobble, a fall, a laugh, up again, thought about the adult's breath. The held then released sound of someone watching something small recover from a fall and continue. The involuntary celebration of it. The joy that arrived before the person decided to permit it. He thought, that is the whole story, that may be all of it, fall, laugh, up again. They have been doing it for 300,000 years. We mistook the falling for the meaning. We did not see the laughing. We never thought to look at what happened next. He sat with that for a long time, outside the viewport, the ordinary star, 40 light years from here. The one that had been executing the same patient burn since before the assembly existed, since before anyone was counting it. The one that had observed from its unremarkable position in an unremarkable arm of an unremarkable galaxy an entire species descend from the trees, look upward, and decide that upward was interesting. And if you have been listening to this story and feeling that particular weight settling somewhere in your chest, the kind that comes when something true finds you unexpectedly, then you already understand what Lens 7 was sitting with. That is exactly the weight this story is supposed to leave. If it moved you, if it stayed with you, hit the like button right now, because that tells us that stories like this one matter to you and it helps more people find them. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already done so, because we are going to keep bringing you stories exactly like this one. Stories about what it means to be the species that fell and laughed and got back up. Stories about what we might look like to the universe watching from a very long distance away. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because what comes next is always worth being here for.